Hello, government class. This is Mrs. Politsky, and I've got notes for Government Chapter 9, Section 1, Presidential Powers. And before we get into talking a little bit about presidential powers, your fellow classmates came up with a list of some qualities that make for a very good president. And so I'm going to share some of these with you. And then we're going to get into talking about some of the powers that are enumerated and some of those powers that are implied. So, what are some of the great qualities of a good president? Your fellow classmates say that they need to be smart, very smart, knowledgeable, good decision maker. They need to know how to talk. They need to be balanced politically so that they can work with both the Democrats and the Republicans. They need to be professional in their appearance and their demeanor. They need to know how to please the people. They need to be level headed, honesty, and finally, maybe some good looks. So, with that, we're going to talk a little bit about some of these explicit powers or the enumerated powers of the president. And going back to the time of the Articles of Confederation, our founders were really in a tight spot. They did not have a president, but they needed one. And I'm going to give you three reasons why they wanted a strong executive. One is to carry out the acts of Congress. If you remember back to the time of the Articles of Confederation, we had no executive power. We had no president, and any kind of law that was passed by our Congress of that era couldn't be executed. No one was able to enforce those laws. Okay. The second that goes along with this is to protect the liberty, private property, and business of our nation. And that kind of goes back to some of the things that we might have talked about with kind of the themes of Thomas Jefferson when he was writing the Declaration of Independence, or if you go further back to John Locke, this idea that we still need these protections. And then finally, this check on the legislative branch. We needed to make sure that the legislative branch wasn't necessarily overly powerful in what they would do. All right, presidential powers granted in the Constitution. These are the things that are somewhat enumerated. So, number one, commander-in-chief. Two, to appoint the executive department. That would be your cabinet heads. And if you remember back the other day, there were about 15 of those cabinet posts that we're talking about. Along with that, to conduct foreign policy, to appoint federal judges, to execute the laws, the State of the Union address, to propose legislation, and then finally to call Congress into special session. These items are enumerated. They're explicitly stated within the Constitution. But the question is, what do we do with these kind of informal powers? And in the middle here, there's some blue ovals here. I'm going to have you fill these in first. First one is talking about inherent or implied. These are powers that are assumed. They're not explicitly written into the Constitution, but some presidents over the years have assumed these powers. The other is the mandate of the people. And if you remember what a mandate is, this is what the people want at that given moment. Okay? Along with that, the immediate needs of the nation. Perhaps an event has occurred that requires immediate action. So, in the red ovals here, there are some examples, and we're going to kind of jot a few of those down as we go. The first one, under the implied powers or inherent powers, would be Thomas Jefferson's Louisiana Purchase. And if you go back to right around the beginning of 1800, Jefferson, for the most part, was here in the United States. Eventually he assumes the presidency, and it's his ambassador to France that kind of makes the deal for the Louisiana Purchase. Along with that, we have Theodore Roosevelt. And Theodore Roosevelt kind of operated under this mantra that you could do anything that the needs of the nation demand unless it's forbidden. In other words, if there's something that is stated in the Constitution that says you can't do it, that's fine. But if there isn't anything that isn't stated, then it's up to the president to decide if they want to go ahead and do that. And many presidents of the modern era have kind of followed through with that philosophy. The mandate of the people. This is what the people want. And FDR, during the time of the Great Depression, conducted what is called a fireside chat. And these were radio conversations that happened every so often, maybe even once a week, to update the public of what was going on in our nation, and in a sense, to build some trust. Finally, the immediate needs of the nation. Again, talking about our friend FDR. Because of the Great Depression and the devastation that it had on our nation, if you remember back, about 25% of the population was unemployed at this period of time. FDR wanted to do things that were going to improve the economy, and a lot of his initial New Deal programs of that first 100 days reflect that. Even though within maybe a year or so, some of these programs were deemed unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. Nevertheless, this helped improve the mood of our nation. And in a way, he saw that even if it did break the law, it did serve the needs of improving the economy. All right, I hope you got everything written down.